Hello, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sonal Zaveri, and on behalf of GENSA, the Gender Equity Network South Asia, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome every one of you to today's special event, incorporating AI into program evaluation, ethical principles through a feminist and gender-responsive lens. And this evening is particularly meaningful as we are also celebrating GENSA's 4th anniversary. It's really heartwarming to see so many familiar faces and new friends joining us to commemorate this milestone. You know, over the past 4 years, GENSA has blossomed into a vibrant community dedicated to promoting equity and gender justice in evaluations. And we are incredibly proud of what we've accomplished together. We're really excited to continue this journey with all of you. And so for those who are new to us, we are a voluntary network, and we work with a core team to manage GENSA. I'm going to be welcoming Shweta, one of our core group members from GENSA, and she will provide a background of GENSA as well as introduce our guest speaker, Zach Tilton. Over to you, Shweta.
Well, thank you, Sonal. Welcome you all. Before we dive into the presentation today, let me share a bit about GENSA. The Gender and Equity Network South Asia, or GENSA as we call it, was a special interest group within the community of evaluators South Asia, encompassing Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Our goal is to strengthen the capacity of our members to advance gender and social justice through gender responsive policies and practices. As mentioned by Sonal, we are a voluntary network managed by our core team. We have been working behind the scenes for this webinar and would like to take this opportunity to appreciate all their efforts. Our core team would like to welcome Zach Tilton as our guest speaker. Today's topic is both timely and crucial. As AI becomes more integrated into our work, it is essential that we apply ethical principles thoughtfully, especially through the lens of feminist and gender responsive methodologies. We'll be looking at practical guidance on implementing AI in a way that supports feminist evaluation principles and promotes equity. I would now like to take the opportunity to welcome our guest, Mr. Zach Tilton. Zach is an evaluation specialist with the Merle Tech Initiative, where he supports practitioners and organizations in responsibly integrating artificial intelligence in their evaluation work and function. He is the co-chair of the Sandbox Working Group in the Natural Language Processing Community of Practice. Additionally, he is also an outgoing member of the Evaluate Management Group, where he has supported young and emerging evaluators worldwide. Zach's field experience spans North and West Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, with over 2 years of development experience in rural communities. He is currently finishing a PhD in evaluation, with his research focused on using AI for meta evaluations. So, without further ado, I please join me in welcoming Mr. Zach Tilton. Over to you, Zach. We welcome you all wholeheartedly.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today, and I want to say a big congratulations to GENSA Network for your 4th anniversary. I'm thrilled and honored to have been invited to speak on this occasion, and look forward to sharing some thoughts about what it means to do ethical evaluation practice with AI. What I'll say is we'll have a Q&A toward the end, but if you have any questions as I'm presenting, feel free to offer those in the chat, and I'll look to my colleagues to monitor the chat. And if there's any questions, feel free to pause mid-presentation if you feel so, and I may monitor the chat as well. So can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So today I'm going to be speaking about, again, ethical AI and evaluation and what it might look like to embrace feminist approaches for gender responsive practices. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about AI-enabled evaluation, a little bit about feminist evaluation, and then offer some principles that inspired by feminist evaluators and activists for what it may look like to be thoughtful with this technology, because I believe that all of us are trying to be um, thoughtful and mindful of how this technology is disrupting our evaluation practice and what we're doing at Merle Tech Initiative and the natural language processing community of practice is really just learning in public and experimenting and trying to share our knowledge with others. So without further ado, thank you for that introduction. I had forgotten that I'd provided so much of a bio as I felt it was important to share a little bit about my background. So I'll skip kind of over what has already been covered. I am a practitioner. I am a student. I am an experimenter. Um, and I am a teacher with the Merle Tech Initiative, at least informally through evaluation capacity development. But what you may not know about me, and given the topic of today, is that I'm also a son, a brother, a husband, and a father. And I'm a cisgendered heterosexual white male, and I think that's really important when we start to think about our practice and evaluation and having a reflexivity when it comes to feminist approaches and gender responsive approaches, is to reflect on the backgrounds that we come from. I grew up in a very socially conservative religious tradition with particular notions about gender roles and gender norms for men and women, and all of these kind of identities have been socialized through that lens. Um, and I very much appreciate and value the fact that I married a very strong feminist and that I had great feminists in my family who, despite our shared traditions that we came from, were able to instill within me the value of egalitarianism and equity and thoughtfulness about how gender shows up in our lives and how, especially from a division of labor in the household. I have 3 kids, and so this is something that we're constantly negotiating. So I think that that's really important as evaluators, that we connect the personal with the professional, and that we realize that as a value-based profession, that we often have priors and biases and experiences that shape how we apprehend and intervene in the work that we do. So with that, I'd like to give just a quick primer on what AI-enabled evaluation is, and then to speak more of this confluence of feminist and gender responsive approaches. And I'd like to first start with the question of what is technology. And this is kind of maybe a scary picture, but it's one I created a few years ago when the AI generative art technology was just starting to take off. This was an image I created for a blog post for AEA 365, where we ruminated on the role of technology in evaluation. And what we have here is our ancestors who used stone hafted tips, spear tips, and our early ancestors. And for me, this is just a reminder that technology is just really any tool or method to help solve a problem. That's at least how I think about technology. It doesn't have to be digital technology. So this is something that is as a through line and a storyline for the field of evaluation. There's some who have made connections about our early ancestors and the evaluative logic that they made, and that we could see as artifacts with the development of early implements, and how that is evidence of an early evaluative logic at play as we see these tools to get better and better. So, what do we mean by artificial intelligence? It sometimes can be really confusing and dizzying to try to wrap our heads around artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing. For our purposes, I don't really want to get too deep into the distinctions, but at least for artificial intelligence, it's really our attempt to have machines simulate human tasks, or to replicate human tasks. Can we get the computer to do something a human has traditionally done? And so there's elements to this, which is, can we get computers to learn as humans learn? Can we get humans to reason as we know humans reason? And can we even get computers to think counterfactually, which some scholars believe is the real distinction between what makes humans and machines different, which is to ask the why question, or what if. So, where I use AI a lot is with natural language processing, which is to say using computers to process human text, either written or video or audio, to enable the evaluation practice that I do. So a little more about AI and evaluation. I would like to actually ask a question of the group, which is, and if you can put your answers in the chat, if you have access to the chat, great. If you don't, no worries. If you want to raise your hand or unmute. But I want to see, what year do you think the field of evaluation started to write about artificial intelligence? So think about this. And if you have an idea, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll open this up and monitor. And if you'd like to unmute, feel free to unmute. But just think, what is the year that we started to pay attention to AI? And when I say we, I mean evaluation theorists or thought leaders. Okay. We have probably about 2010s, 2020. Okay. Anyone else? 2015. Okay. 2010s. Okay, I'm gonna give you a bit of a hint. If I showed you this book, what year would you say then? The 70s. Uh-huh. We're getting closer with the 70s. Right now, Senjuka is the closest with their guess, and Sonal, the 50s and 60s. Okay, good, good. So Sonal is actually the closest, because the year that evaluations theorists first started to write about AI was actually 1950. And I'm going to share a quote with you. Perhaps the day will yet come when we, having promoted ourselves to the leading role by discovering there is no one above us, will find ourselves in the role of the magician, the possessor of mysterious powers, and snapping at our heels will be the machines. So, does anyone want to take a guess as to who might have been, of our kind of parents of the field, who might have been the person to write about this? Aha. This is a very Gene Roddenberry Star Trek quote. It wasn't Gene Roddenberry who wrote it. I will let you know that it was actually, let's see, Michael Scriven. in 1950. The book was published in 1960, but the work was written in 1950. And this is in the essay. It's a playoff of Isaac Asimov's uh, The Complete Robot, some short stories. But I thought that I just found this out a few months ago when a colleague shared me this book, and I would have never guessed that evaluation and one of the leading parents of the field had wrestled with artificial intelligence, 75 years ago. But I think that's really interesting. So make sure that my slides are advancing. Okay, so what is generative artificial intelligence? Well, we have good old-fashioned AI, which is a broad field. We saw kind of the visual where the machine learning was a subfield. They were really looking to see if machine can learn to do human tasks. So a lot of the tasks of good old-fashioned AI are to categorize, to sort, to make sense of existing data, and to find patterns from large amounts of data. And so when I think of good old-fashioned AI, I like to think of the 1854 Broad Street cholera outbreak. Some of you may be familiar with this, some maybe not. For those who aren't, this was an instance where there was an outbreak in London of cholera, and a physician by the name of Mike Snow, if I have that right, started to map all the incidents of cholera. And he found that there was a pattern of every instance where there was a cholera instance. And by that, identifying, using data and identifying a pattern, was able to locate the source of the outbreak, which was the Broad Street well. So when I think of good old-fashioned AI, I think about there being 1,000 Mike Snows that are finding patterns in data. With generative AI, it's a new class of AI techniques that learn and mimic patterns in pre-existing human-generated data, but to create new data, right? And so we're all probably familiar with ChatGPT or other tools where we have this generative aspect. These are based off of a new class of technology called transformers and large language models that use this deep learning techniques to take large data sets to summarize, to generate, and predict new text. And the comparison that has been made for these is that these are like stochastic parrots. Now, stochastic means that there's this probabilistic aspects to them, and so these machines are almost parroting the data that they've heard uh, uh, in a probabilistic manner. And so, just to kind of give you a kind of explanation of the stochastic aspect or the probabilistic, is when we engage with generative artificial intelligence or large language models that are trained on grammar and semantics or even code, what's happening when we query a large language model and we receive a response back is that response is a product of a lot of calculations and multiplications of matrices that are essentially trying to predict the most likely word in a sentence. And so that's what's happening when we are getting our feedback from these machines, is that it's really a lot of math and algorithms that are predicting and completing the next sentence, which can be quite convincing that there's this machine that is cognizant or reasoning. And there's actually quite a bit of debate right now as to what extent these machines are reasoning or are not reasoning, or just using their training data to predict the next token. But what I think it's important for us to know that this is how these operate, because sometimes there's a little bit of magical thinking about the tools, and it's great to demystify the tools and understand what they are and are not doing. So there's two camps of AI discourse. You've probably heard of folks talk about risks of AI, of this moment of singularity, of having potentially some sci-fi scenario where machines become aware and self-conscious, and maybe they don't have the same interests or values that we have as humans. So this question about alignment and aligning AI with human values. This is from the AI safety camp that are interested in future risks and mitigating future risks, and also trying to maximize the value of AI to ameliorate social ills, right? There's another camp, which is the AI ethics camp, which is more focused on present harms. Um, they're interested in researching how not future risks and mitigating those, but understanding how algorithms are already contributing to present harms. And they are making the case for more transparency, more accountability, and privacy when it comes to thinking about how these systems are affecting our lives. And so this is just to kind of give you a landscape here. I personally am more of the AI ethics camp. I think that I have a low probability that the machines are going to take over the world tomorrow. But I do know that folks are using this technology right now, and that good things are happening and bad things are happening. So what is Gen AI enabled evaluation? Well, it's a particular type of MERL tech application. And when I say MERL tech, that MERL means monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning. And so the intersection of tech enabling that function, where key issues in evaluation practice are partially resolved or addressed through the responsible integration of AI tools with evaluation processes and products to improve the quality of those processes and products. So here's some key observations about generative AI and evaluation. One, AI innovation is here, and it's not some ephemeral thing, not vaporware. Two, we need to own and not be owned by AI innovation. AI-enabled evaluation should be needs-driven, meaning that we should not lead with the solution, but understand how the AI is helping our practice. Four, there's real harms that are here, and we don't have some science fiction scenario. AI can and does enable the evaluation function, and we're finding that evaluators are very open to explore and experiment with these tools. Now, I'd like to talk about feminist evaluation and AI-enabled evaluation. A few of the researchers at the AI ethics camp have done work to realize that tech, like evaluation, is value laden or value programmed. You may hear that a refrain that tech is neutral. I even have mentioned that tech is a tool to solve problems. But the technology is developed by humans who come from particular life experiences, world outlooks, and these have various values programmed into them. Kathy O'Neill, who wrote Weapons of Math Destruction, said algorithms are opinions embedded in code. As evaluators, we may say algorithms have values that are embedded in code. And Safia Noble, who wrote Algorithms of Oppression, said search algorithms are not just a reflection of our society, they're also a lens through which society is shaped. These two authors did really important investigative research to underscore and highlight how algorithms are harming marginalized communities, especially Safia Noble, whose work started when she went on Google one day to do some research and saw that the autocomplete for the algorithm had racist and misogynistic completions about Black women and women of color. And so I share this research to foreground the feminist work, and that there are many great researchers who are thinking through how AI and technology is shaped by and shaping notions of gender and also various identities that we like to analyze with feminist evaluation. So here's some biases that just a handful that you can have when you think of using AI or when we use AI. There's historical biases such as racial or gender stereotypes, representational bias, so the imbalance of group in the training data. For example, a lot of these large language models draw on English, Western data sets with English speaking texts. So again, there's this semantic bias here where you can have stereotypes in the text. A lot of the tools that AI, so artificial intelligence is really based off of human intelligence. These machines learn only because we've provided data and coded data. So labeling, that process of labeling, there can be bias that happens there. And then finally, an automatic or an algorithmic bias where there's biased programming from the algorithms, as we saw with Safia Noble's work, and even an automation bias, which is to say that users of the tech will feel like that this is true just because it's automated. So I was able to work on what I believe is one of the first, if not the first, AI-enabled evaluation strategies with the UNFPA. And given all of these biases and risks, we used and leaned on the application of principles. And to quote the strategy, it says the development and practical application of generative AI is dynamic landscape, and due to their nature, principles can mitigate the obsolescence of overly prescriptive rule-based guidance. So what do I mean by principles? Well, Michael Quinn Patton has articulated that principles, rather than rigid plans or fulsome strategies, provide guidance for navigating such complexity. Principles-focused evaluation provides feedback about how well that navigational process is working. So Michael would say principles are values with verbs. You may think of the principle to do no harm. That is a verb, an injunction from the value of non-malfeasance. And so what I'd like to share with you for the remainder of my presentation is just a handful of principles informed by feminist evaluators and activists. So here are some of my feminist evaluation heroes: Donna Mertens, Hazel Simonet, Nan Wehia Pehana, and Donna Podens. These practitioners have done great work in terms of the transformative branch of evaluation that really does seek to highlight, as the GENSA network, social justice and equity. And I appreciate their work and their insights. And I have to make a confession, though. I've learned, aside from my family and my evaluators and those that have taught me what it means to be a feminist from an early age, even my sister who decided to change her surname because of the patriarchal or patrilineal surname practices, to my wife who has not taken my surname but has kept her surname, and I kept my surname, and we have different surname naming conventions with our children. I've learned a lot from my family and from these professional evaluators, but one of the persons that I've learned the most about feminism is actually from South Asia, from India, and it's Anuradha Gandhi. Anuradha Gandhi was a lifelong revolutionary, devoted over 30 years of her life to underground revolutionary work. She transitioned from academia to activism and left her role to become a full-time activist with the Dalit movement and to provide rights for the Dalits, advocated for marginalized groups, and persevered through illness. She contracted a type of malaria because of her underground work and her inability to access healthcare, and was widely respected and loved for both her professional work, her revolutionary zeal, and her personal qualities. My favorite book about feminism comes from Anuradha Gandhi. It is Philosophical Trends in the Feminist Movement. It critiques major feminist theories, analyzes liberal, radical, and social feminism, emphasizes class struggle, and argues for integrating feminism with the anti-capitalist movement, challenges Western-centric views, highlights perspectives from the global majority and the global South, examines patriarchy historically and explores its evolution alongside class society, and advocates for a revolutionary proletarian feminism that seeks for not a reformist approach, but a very radical transformative approach. And so if we were to position Anuradha Gandhi on the evaluation theory tree, she would be on the transformative branch that seeks to bring about equity and social justice with her work. Now, what I love about Anuradha's work is this aspect of bringing in various identities, not just gender, because often when we think of gender and a responsive or feminist work, and we think maybe this is just for women, at least in the West. But we know that there's various intersecting identities, and intersectionality, including class, is very important to consider. So I'd like to offer some principles for a proletarian feminist AI-enabled evaluation. The first is to interrogate AI biases. I mentioned a few AI biases, but it's important for us as evaluators to critically examine how AI tools replicate or reify class or gender biases, and recognize that technology can reinforce systemic inequalities. The second principle is to prioritize working class data sovereignty. We work with many communities, and when we, as evaluators, and as we start to use AI, we need to be mindful of how, and we give folks the ability and the agency to either opt in or opt out of having their data being processed by AI. And so what I recommend is when you go and do data collection, that you have an informed consent that says we may or may not be using this data AI technology with this data, and allowing participants to end their participation there if they're not comfortable with that. We need to demystify AI for collective empowerment. So I shared part of this, but really understand that how AI operates in our lives at a basic level, and allow folks who are involved in evaluation to decide how we use it, if we use it, either on a pragmatic stance or a principled stance. Even though I'm very much involved in using AI in evaluation, I respect when folks make those principled or pragmatic decisions not to use AI for a particular reason, and not all evaluations are appropriate to use AI. I believe that we should use AI and contextualize the outputs of AI with historical and material conditions of class and gender struggle, right? Understanding that a lot of our notions and the biases that show up in AI come from historical and concrete conditions. We should challenge AI-driven labor exploitation and assess how the tools impact gendered labor, and stand in solidarity with those who are resisting that. I met in Morocco, where I met Sonal. I met a handful of data labelers who were working for big tech to look at and do content moderation, which means they were looking at very harmful images on the internet, and they were labeling them as harmful. But they're a working class group, an exploited group, as well as those in Kenya who have recently unionized to have more rights when it comes to labeling data for AI systems. And so I think this is really important to understand that the AI just doesn't come out of nowhere. It actually comes from the labor power of much of the global South. So synthesize AI and human knowledge. When we combine our AI with our evaluation reasoning, it's important to situate that within our knowledge and practice of evaluation. and to make sure that we are not just taking the AI's word for it, but we're providing accompaniment, and that the AI is supporting us in our evaluative reasoning to provide comprehensive evaluative analysis. I think that we should all critique AI's role in our capitalist society, right? We know that gender divisions and patriarchy, that those come from various historical conditions such as feudalism, capitalism, imperialism. And these technologies are being developed by big tech, by a capitalist and logic, the same logic that has contributed to some of the gender divisions that we experience in our daily lives and that our evaluation participants experience. Ensure AI enhanced participation. So use AI to broaden participation while maintaining the centrality of human agency and collective action. Leverage AI for revolutionary insights or transformative insights. So use AI in your evaluations to uncover patterns of oppression or opportunities for transformational change. And I think that that's a great way to flip the script on how sometimes these data-driven models can reintroduce or reify some of those biases that were brought up by those researchers and that we're aware of. And finally, cultivate a critical AI consciousness or a critical literacy. So develop an ongoing reflexivity about how AI is used in evaluation and its implication for broader societal contexts, even in the programs that we evaluate. These principles, I believe, are a way for us uh, to think thoughtfully in terms of applying feminist theory, in terms of having gender lenses to the work that we do. And these are really strategic, high-level strategic effectiveness principles. As you think about these principles in your own practice, you can develop operational principles as to what it means when it comes to the nuts and bolts of developing in terms of reference, of instrumental, of creating a data collection instrument. But I believe that we all have a responsibility to wrestle with the implication of AI in our lives, especially professional work. And if we have a professional commitment to feminist and gender responsive approaches, we can have the AI complement and enhance that value framework as opposed to work against it. But we do have to be intentional. So that's my presentation. If you have any specific questions, here's my email. I would love to connect and hear about your work and collaborate. So please shoot me an email. And with that, I'll turn it back to my GENSA colleagues for Q&A.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you so much. I am Neha, one of the 4 group members of GENSA, and we would really like to thank you for the insightful presentation. Now we open the discussion to our audience, and we already have a few questions, so I'll just share the question that I saw first. This is by Mahesh. He's asking that you've mentioned about AI algorithms being biased. How are upcoming technological advancements addressing the issue of bias in algorithms, particularly in the context of gender and evaluation, gender responsive evaluation?
It's a great question, Mahesh. Thank you for that. I think the first thing is that the developer to recognize that as evaluators, we're often the users of these tools. And so we don't really have a lot of say in the development of these tools. There are some applications of these tools in terms of making custom chatbots or fine tuning or providing guardrails, um, custom instructions to some of these tools. But by and large, if we decide to use these tools, we're kind of left with the reality that many of them were trained on data that do have these biases. And I'll give you one example. A lot of these tools were used what's called a common crawl, which is a web crawling source of data. And early on in that data set, many folks didn't want to have embarrassing things come up in the data, such as that you'll find on the internet, such as sexual preferences or various communities that have sexual orientation with associated with kinks, sexual kinks. And so what that means is that a lot of gender identities were erased from that training data in association. And so to your question about gender responsive, and particularly in the context of gender responsive evaluation, when we start to use tools, it's very important to keep in mind some of the models that you use. You can look at model cards to see what training data they've been used on, and the various tools. It's sometimes hard to distinguish between the tool that I'm using and the algorithm that the tool is based off of, or the model or the training data. And what I will say is that more and more companies are mindful of the way biases are showing up, and they are putting in guardrails or behind the scenes instructions for these tools to be more mindful of biases and to correct for them. In terms of, again, advancements in gender responsive evaluation, the field is so new. This is such a kind of a wild west, so to speak, in terms of even just traditional evaluation practice, that a lot of what we're encouraging folks to do is to, if you find yourself in a community and you say, I'm really much a gender responsive evaluator or a feminist evaluator, we're encouraging folks to experiment with the tools to really kick the tires and say where it does and doesn't meet the needs of your evaluation participants, of your evaluation team. So that's a little bit about how the biases are being addressed with guardrails and with correctives. But the reality is that some of the high performing foundational models have these biases in them, and the companies need to provide correctives themselves.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And the next question is that could you suggest like what would be the best tools to use for evaluation or research?
It's a great question, and it's a question I get every time I speak or train and present. And what I will say is that I can share with you some tools that I've used personally and some that I enjoy, and I can speak as Zach, the practitioner. But I will say that as the representative of the Merle-Tech Initiative, we've been agnostic in terms of endorsing any tools. And we are coming out with a consumer report of sorts, where we will be crowdsourcing ratings and evaluations and criteria for doing ratings of various products to be used in evaluation, AI products in evaluation. So stay tuned for a more comprehensive answer. But for my own personal answer, I use a host of tools from OpenAI's ChatGPT to Claude, which is put out by Anthropic. These are both consumer-facing chatbot interfaces that have various features that allow them to do coding with Python, or to create assets that we call artifacts, such as anything from a video game to a data visualization. I also have used AI Lies, which has been marketed to the evaluation community, and I've used that on a large scale evaluation to do qualitative data analysis. And I use other tools such as Otter AI, or even some open source tools like Whisper, which is an open source large language model that you can load onto your own computer to do transcriptions if you have very sensitive data. That's something I will say, is that there's tools that are closed source and proprietary, and there's open source tools. So those are just a handful of tools. But for those who maybe had the same question, stay tuned. We're hoping to have a more comprehensive report for the tools that evaluators can use.
So the next question is by Govind Kelkar, and she's asking that, do you think that we have still not explored the south roots of AI development?
The South roots. Okay. Possibly in terms of how the Global South has
Global South.
contributed to AI development. I think it's a great question. And yes and no. I do think that there are a lot of investigative journalists who have peeled back the curtain on some of these tools to realize that there's a massive labor force in India, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, who are providing the sometimes it's a misnomer of the AI where folks think that they're getting AI, but they're actually getting humans on the other end who are supporting this technology. The other aspect is that when it is truly the machine operating, it's a result of many of the toiling masses of the global south who are having to label the data and sometimes look at, like I mentioned, very harmful data to filter out what we don't want the algorithms to be using or to be trained on. So I think as feminist evaluators and gender responsive evaluators, it's really important for us to think about which models we use and recognize that this technology, it is being driven by big technology, by capitalist class, and that there is a working class proletarian base in the global south who are receiving this kind of unequal exchange in terms of the expertise that they, in their human intelligence they're providing, and that many folks are then getting the value out of. So I appreciate the question, Govind, and I would love to see more research on that.
So there's the next question by Sanjukta, and she says that what can power holders do to support feminist evaluation approaches, and especially supporting evaluation beyond the gender binary, given the biases inherent in AI models?
Thank you. I love the question. Well, sometimes it's hard for power holders to support feminist approaches because many feminist approaches like to critique power, and I should say good feminist approaches critique power, um, and so you know, sometimes you have to be like a Trojan horse in terms of, very, it's infrequent that power holders will say they're not interested in being gender responsive or having gender equity, right? But what many decision makers don't know, or commissioners or managers of evaluation, is that, again, as you mentioned, feminist evaluation is more than just evaluation about women's issues or even of this gender binary. We know that there are a host of um, uh, power dynamics from, LGBTQ or queer-led evaluation to evaluations that seek to peel back aspects about like critical system heuristics, how those who are marginalized or on the edges of society experience programs that are intended to benefit them. And so when it comes to decision makers or power holders supporting feminist approaches, especially with AI, I think many power holders are excited about AI because it means that they can have things be more efficient, more effective. Maybe they're saving money. And what I would say is that where you have a power holder that's interested in using AI for evaluation, potentially save money, to flip that script, and instead of viewing it as necessarily more efficient, to think about what can we do with the time or the resources saved to improve the quality and the depth of our analysis, especially some of the analyses we haven't traditionally done, such as looking at marginalized communities or those who may be affected adversely by the evaluation, right? So those are a few of my thoughts for that question, but I really appreciate that question.
So yeah, I had one question. I just wanted to understand, since there is such limited capacity in general and such data issues that exist in the global south, so how does one really look at, like, going feminist evaluation is the next step, but then integrating AI itself and the associated costs? I just feel that it's a long. So any comments on that?
So if I understand, and help me out here, that how is um, how is AI, like, you feel like it's a lost cause sometimes in terms of the global south? Can you repeat the question for me briefly?
What I mean to say is that uh, in, like, we have issues in the general capacity also of evaluators, and then we have
Mhm.
data issues here, and then
Yes.
we also have costs associated with AI. Now, all those things don't work in the favor of the discipline or the evaluation function as such. So then integrating AI and then on top of it, then making it feminist, it's like another layer to it. So, like,
Yeah.
how does one really look at those things?
Well, I think if you have a value framework that has a commitment to equity and to attending to how gender shows up in our lives and affects evaluation participants, that it's hard not to pick up the AI and ask those questions, right? And so we're probably speaking to the choir, so to speak, in terms of those who are already at the fore of thinking about how this technology may be affecting um, evaluation participants or program participants. And my thoughts to your question is, yes, it is tricky because, especially in under-resourced locations, another component of this is that there's languages here, and in Southeast Asia, South Asia, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of languages that are spoken by evaluation participants and program participants. And right now, the technology really works only super great with Western languages. We're seeing in the African context that Swahili is being developed quite well, but there's a handful of languages that perform poorly in terms of evaluation benchmarks for these tools. So I'm just giving credence to your question or your comment question, which is to say, yes, it's super tricky. And but I do know that there are organizations that are working on under-resourced languages, um, and there are radical and forward-thinking research outfits that are thinking about how the global south is maybe benefiting or not benefiting from this AI push. And yeah, I would say, when you start to integrate AI, I know we've been talking at high levels here in terms of principles, but a lot of this does come down to nuts and bolts as to, is there an evaluation adjacent task that's being enabled, or is there an evaluation specific task? So I'll make a plug for on the 25th of this month, we are having a webinar, maybe a little late, actually, for maybe in the middle of the night for if you are in South Asia or in India, but we will record it. And it is through the natural language processing community of practice about, demystifying AI practice along an evaluation life cycle. And so my recommendation for folks who may feel like there's a lot of barriers to entry to use the technology is to just to try to think about, what are you doing today and what are you doing tomorrow in your evaluation practice, and could you have a thought partner, so to speak, in terms of one of these tools that's free or maybe subscription based, and could you just start with using the tool to help you think through biases you may have? Because we all have biases, we all have priors, we all have blind spots, whether they be culturally or gender or various identities. And so that's at least one way that you could start, where it may seem daunting to think about how to use the AI, let alone how to use the AI in a gender responsive and feminist way.
Thank you.
Zach, could you post on the chat some link about that particular webinar that you were talking about? Or at least,
Sure, I can try to find that.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I should warn folks that my technology, my computer battery just told me that my computer will go to sleep unless I plug in, and I'm kind of away from my cord, but hopefully I can last the last few minutes of the presentation. So I'll put a link in the chat there, Sonal, for the event. Any other questions?
There was a comment which says, in my humble opinion, AI has limits at the level of perception, qualitative evaluation, and the participation of the individual seems necessary. This is by I mean, it's a comment. It's not a question.
That's great. I'm gonna review the comment here. Let me just put this registration link in the chat. So who made the comment, just so I can
Cecily, if I'm getting the name right.
or if you'd like to just repeat the comment so I can engage with it again, as I was kind of preoccupied with the hyperlink.
Yeah, so I just put it in Google Translate. Let me just repeat. In my humble opinion, AI has limits at the level of perception, qualitative evaluation, and the participation of the individual seems necessary for me.
It's a great recognition, and thank you for that comment. And you know, what we've used AI for qualitative data analysis, and we've used AI for evaluation facilitation. And so I think there's a few ways that you can use this technology. You can use it in by yourself to enable your tasks. Or you can also use it in community with evaluation participants to make your evaluation more participatory. There is a risk that the technologies we use can create more of a digital divide in our evaluation participants. So we need to be very mindful of that, and not just to be culturally responsive when there's different cultures, but culturally specific. And so there may be instances in where an evaluation you're conducting, it isn't appropriate to introduce this technology or other digital technology. But maybe you could use it on the back end, right? So I will say that I really appreciate those evaluators who are thinking through how to use AI to make their work more participatory. And there are limits to the technology, as you mentioned, and rightfully so. The technology is right now predictive, and it completes the most probabilistic word in the sequence of tokens. I will say that the technology you're using right now is going to be the worst that you've ever used, or that you will use in the future, that it'll only get better. And it likely will only continue to disrupt our evaluation practice. And so if you're still on the fence, you should at least think about how the technology is disrupting your work or your colleagues' work. And if you maybe have a principled decision not to use it, you should at least understand how others are using it, because it's highly likely that the AI is already on your evaluation team, if not involved in your evaluation process. We heard from some colleagues that they received some qualitative responses to their survey that they could tell was generated by ChatGPT. Now, I think we always need to be careful about being confident as to what we text we think is generated by AI or not, because you get in trouble there. But sometimes you can pick that out. And they were saying that this is mostly non-native English speakers who are using it. And so this is just to give you an example of how the technology is presenting new challenges for our profession that we didn't think about 2 years ago. And these will only continue to grow. But not just the challenges, we'll have new opportunities. And so I think a great place, as I mentioned, is in the Merletech natural language processing community of practice. If folks are more interested in hearing about specifics, about opportunities, about challenges, I would recommend registering in that community. We have various ways to engage on LinkedIn, on Slack, with newsletters, with webinars, very much like GENSA in terms of trying to create a distributed community of practice and volunteer organization for professional evaluation. But yes. Any other questions or comments, Neha?
No, I think we are good. Thank you so much. So as we wrap up the evening's event, I want to extend my gratitude to all of you for being here and contributing to the success of GENSA's 4th anniversary celebration. Let's continue to work together and foster an environment of learning and collaboration, striving to incorporate feminist and gender-responsive methodologies in our evaluations. Together, we can ensure that our work contributes to a more just and equitable world. And thank you so much. In case you want to volunteer with GENSA, we have put in a link for a Google form in chat. Please do join GENSA Network and also register for Zach's webinar coming up. And we wish you a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Congratulations, GENSA.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.